Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Eleanor Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Eleanor Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and the math just works. This week, I'm chatting to guest Megan Dalla-Camina, but first, here is my thought-provoking headline. Australia is dominating the Commonwealth Games with 51 golds, and England is next with 15. Now, my first question to you is, did you even know that the Commonwealth Games was on? And did you even know that Australia was absolutely smashing it? Now, I kind of did, but to be honest with you, I didn't realise that it was this many with a margin of this much. And the point is not how well we're going with the Commonwealth Games. The point is, why did I not even know that the Commonwealth Games was really happening? Why am I not, seeing it on all the different TVs? Why do I not have it on my TV in the background all the time, which I would have done in years past? Well, let's think about what we've just experienced. Wimbledon? Did you know that Wimbledon came and passed? Probably not, because you were probably tuning in to the FIFA World Cup. I certainly didn't. And suddenly it was semi-finals time with Wimbledon. And I thought, how did I miss this? Again, Wimbledon is one of those things that I just always have on. I'm always looking at this, who's making the next round, what the scores are, and all the rest of it. I think at the moment, just at this point in time, there's this real saturation of these big, really important, potentially really big money-making events that possibly are not yielding the return because they're not getting the eyeballs on, because the eyeballs are so distracted by one thing after another thing after another thing. And of course, the market for FIFA and the FIFA World Cup and the market for the Commonwealth Games and the market for Wimbledon will have some nuance. But I can honestly say in years past, I have been fascinated and tuned in to all three of those things. And yet kind of FIFA overtook everything. And by the time, here we are, go Aussie go, at the Commonwealth Games, I'm kind of a little bit tuned out. There's so much on. And so my challenge when I read this headline is I just think there's too much on. And as a result, I am personally not valuing really any of them. And it got me thinking about where does this show up in the workplace? I was having a conversation with my CFOs yesterday, and we were talking about all of the different investments that their organisations have in the course of the last financial year. Of course, in Australia, our financial year is 30 June year end. And there were heaps of investments. And you look at them all in a list and go, did these really yield the return that we wanted? In many cases, the answer is no. For those that you want to create a return of staff engagement, staff performance, staff happiness, retention, and then revenue, profit, margin, it's not yielding that return. And I think the answer is we've just got too much on. And so it's fascinating how I read this headline and that's where my head went. I think the sequencing, I've got this statement that I say all the time. You might have heard me say, we can do all of the things, just not at the same time. And so I'm more and more believe at work, when it comes to investments, we can do all of the things. When it comes to goals, we can achieve all of the goals, just not at the same time. And the sequencing of all of these great things that you want to do to get the return really matters. And, so I would also kind of plead with the sports gods, can we please sequence these events so that supporters like me who like all of the things can really tune in and be present to them. And now to our chat with Megan Dalla-Camina. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome our next guest today on the pod. Megan Dalla-Camina is the founder and CEO of Women Rising, an award-winning leadership company that has supported thousands of women and male allies across 76 countries to build meaningful careers, grow their leadership, and create lasting impact. Following an 18-year executive career with IBM, GE, and PwC, Megan founded Women Rising to help organisations develop exceptional women leaders, engage male allies, and build more inclusive, high-performing workplace cultures. A sought-after keynote speaker, leadership expert, and PhD researcher, Megan is the author of Women Rising, a practical guide to navigating leadership and career success with confidence, courage, and authenticity. Her latest book, She Who Remembers, reflects the evolution of her work, exploring identity, purpose, and what it means to lead without losing yourself. Megan's work has been featured in hundreds of media outlets globally, including Forbes, Fast Company, CNN, and Psychology Today. Megan, it goes without saying with an intro like that, it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a privilege for me to be here. So thanks for having me on.
Now, you're most welcome. So, in reading a little bit about you, I read that you built your company, Women Rising, to help women succeed without disappearing into the systems they are trying to succeed in. Now, I am personally fascinated with how people shape systems and how systems influence and therefore shape people themselves. So tell me, as a starting point, what are these systems that you refer to?
Oh, that's a big question to start with. That's a great question. So the system that we're all operating within is patriarchy. And it's something that
Could you define patriarchy for us so we can work with the same definition?
Yeah. So in my very simple mind, the way that I think about it and break it down is systems that were designed by men for men to succeed in. And let's just say really clearly at the outset, it's not men's fault, right? So this is not about gender division. Everything that I do is about bringing all genders together and, unification and inclusion and all of the things which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that is the system that we are still living and working under. And when we look at our workplaces, and this is so much of what I write about in Women Rising around the paradoxes of power. So much of what we are operating within and under, all genders, by the way, not just women, is under this system that has been set up. So when we look at what does that actually mean in practice, I talk and teach and write about these paradoxes of power. We see the empowerment paradox, where women are told they're empowered to succeed, but in systems that are actually set up to disempower them. And we can break that down. We look at the leadership paradox, where we tell women, we want you to lead, but don't lead like that. Like, don't lead outside the box of the standard mode of leadership. Now, this is changing, but it's not changing anywhere near fast enough. And that version of leadership is still very, masculine, male. We see this in all the statistics, across organizations, workplaces, governments, etc. The motherhood paradox that impacts women. We want women to be successful in the workplace, but yet we want them to work like they don't have children at home, and we want them to mother like they don't have jobs outside the home. So all of these, this all stems from patriarchy, which is something that we very rarely talk about in a workplace context. It's something that in my 18-year corporate career and all of the work that we did, including the work with Male Champions of Change, was always just under the surface, but we would never name it. We would never get into it. We'd never talk about it. So much of the work that we do is doing the work with women, doing the work with male allies, both individually and in the system, but with the recognition that the system, the biases, the leadership constructs exist, and that we're not trying to create change without acknowledging the fishbowl that we're all swimming in. And that's one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in the last 25 years. We're trying to fix equality, but we're not talking about the system that we're in. So, yeah. Does that give you enough to start with?
100%. And because you're absolutely right. I'm just reflecting on my corporate career, and we never named patriarchy. In fact, it's almost like taboo. It's like we've got to talk about inclusion and diversity,
Totally.
but God forbid we're not allowed to talk about the P word. Isn't that fascinating? I've never thought about that before, Megan.
It's totally, and taboo is the right word. And I remember back in 2010, in Australia, the Male Champions of Change started. So that was Elizabeth Broderick getting together, started with 4 of the most powerful CEOs in the country. My CEO at IBM, I was head of strategy. My male CEO was the first call that she made to say, we need to get the men and get the men to start working as male allies of change. And I remember back then, the first time I ever said the word patriarchy in a corporate context and what happened in that room. And the eyes went down, everyone started fidgeting in their seat, and it was like, she didn't just say that.
Huh.
And like this is a long time ago now, right? But still to this day, I'm in organizations every day around the world, and with thousands of women and thousands of men. We're now having the conversation, but it's still kind of edgy, you know. It's still kind of, we're really going to talk about what's going on rather than just try and work around the edges of it.
And I'm going to say something that will sound a little bit, I don't know what the right word is, but I'll say it anyway. Reflecting on what you just said, I probably didn't say the word patriarchy until I was an adult. Barbie, the movie, obviously talked a lot about patriarchy. In fact, that was one of the key themes from it. And I was so grateful for that. I have 2 girls, they're 13 and 14. And so when did that movie come out? Maybe 4 years ago. So they're a bit younger. And so I love this idea that, you know, my girls are able to just at least say the word and start to get an awareness of it at that age. And then perhaps that give them an opportunity to learn about the system through fiction and in a really accessible way. Because, you know, as someone who's in their mid-40s, I'm sure I didn't say the word patriarchy until I was an adult, which means, you know, and as I said, I've never heard it in the workplace in my mid-40s.
Yeah. I like that. I think that movie in so many ways changed the game. It changed the game for conversations at home, you know, in workplaces, like it really, you know, Greta Gerwig, I mean, just bow down, right? And I was the same. I went through my entire I went through my entire upbringing and my entire corporate career, not entire corporate career, until like the last probably 5 to 7 years, just thinking that gender imbalance was normal, that this was just the way that it was. And I went to a high school, very small high school, that had 5 girls and 22 boys for the entirety of my higher education. So, you know, I sang in bands. All of my friends were boys, you know, and then I went into the workplace, into GE, then PwC. IBM was better, but all incredibly male-dominated. I mean, IBM was better, but it was still tech, right? Which is 70-30 at best, 70% men, 30% women. So until I was probably around the age that you are now, I'm older than you, had no real sense or idea that the system was broken, essentially, that it impacted women in so many challenging ways, that it also impacted men in ways that we're still trying to unravel, and that patriarchy sat underneath all of it.
Yeah, and absolutely, because how do you fix a system when you can't even define what system you're operating in?
Yes.
I want to come back to this idea of an empowerment paradox. Could you give me an example of what that is, maybe through a client example or a personal example? What does that look like? What is an example of that? Because that sounds fascinating to me.
I mean, what we're talking about is an example of the empowerment paradox when we talk about patriarchy, right? Because women in workplaces, and I like literally work with thousands of women every year, coach them through our Women Rising program. So like I'm seeing this first hand through the stories, through the examples, through what's happening every single day. And also seeing the other side of that with the work that we do with male allies. So it's real time. Yeah, and the empowerment paradox, be empowered but in systems that disempower you. Part of that is this unspokenness. It is this mirage that we have that we fixed all the problems, that there is no longer an inequality problem, that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, in the last couple of years has gone backwards, has vanished. It's coming back. We're seeing this thing turn around. But because of what's been happening in the US and the flow-on effect of that, that we're all good. We don't need to do any more work here. And then we look at the statistics, right? Yes. So like this is a high-level example of the empowerment paradox where we say, what are you talking about? It's all good now. We've done the work. You've had the women's movement. You've had all of the stages and we've now moved on. And moving on right now is all about AI, right? So everything's getting redirected, all the funds, everyone's trying to, figure it out. And women are told that we fix the system, everything's okay. And then women sit there and think, oh, must be just me. It must be just me that I'm sitting in a meeting and I just got interrupted 3 times and my confidence has just gone down. And yet my manager's saying, well, if you want to be more successful, you just need to be more confident or have more executive presence. So it's this sort of bypassing of what's actually happening in workplaces, women being told, just be more confident, be empowered. We're all here to support you. We want you to lead, go into leadership positions. And then women get into those leadership positions and are told, all those feminine traits that you're leading with, vulnerability, empathy, intuition. We don't want any of that here. Where's the data? So it's all of these signals that women get told every single day in micro ways and in macro ways that feed into all of the paradoxes. But that empowerment paradox kind of sits. It's the first one I always talk about because it's one that it's kind of the umbrella, the umbrella paradox across the board.
And I really liked, again, I was reading a part of your book and I've got a paragraph of it, which I think maybe talks to what you've just alluded to. So I'm going to read it and I'd like to explore it because it was one of those things that I kind of went, oh my goodness, like where's the T-shirt? Where's the flag I'm in? Like I had this whole physiological reaction. So I'll read it out. Our life unfolds in the direction of the questions that we ask. Perhaps we have been asking the wrong question all along. Perhaps the question isn't how workplaces change for women. Perhaps the question is how we, as women, become so empowered and clear and conscious and connected that workplaces have no choice but to evolve into an entirely new system that must elevate to meet the new consciousness that women create in the world. Like, oh. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean? What's your vision when you were writing that, when you think about this day in, day out? Tell me what that means and what that looks like.
Yes. It could be one of the favorite things I've ever written that you've just read out. Yeah. Because I feel like it's the ground on which I walk. Right? It is the underlying premise, foundation, purpose, mission of everything that I believe. And here's why, right? When you say, what does that mean? It means there's 2 conversations that happen in this space that I've witnessed so I've been in my own business now for 13 years. I was in corporate for 18 years and I worked for about 6 years before I hit corporate. So I've seen a lot in the time. I've studied, I've done master's degrees, I'm doing a PhD. There's these 2 primary conversations that happen. One is we need to fix the system. And if we can just, and this is the conversation we've been having for 40 plus years, right? Fix the system, fix the system.
Yeah.
And if we can fix the system, then women will naturally rise up through the system. So that's one side of the conversation.
Yeah.
The other side of the conversation is fix the women. And I use that word very intentionally, fix the women. And this is what feminists have been railing against, and everyone who works in the DEI space have been railing against for decades. Women don't need to be fixed, right?
Yeah.
So here's these two conversations that have been going on for decades.
Yes.
And I've been on both sides of those conversations, and I've been in the system, and I've been, trying to address the system. But there's this whole other conversation, and this is what what I really dedicate so much of my work to, which is what if it's none of that, right? Because we've been trying to fix the system for decades and decades and decades. And yes, we see progress, and then we slip back, and then we see progress, and then we slip back, and right? And the world's complicated. It's getting more complex. It's getting harder. My core belief is that if we can wake women up to the system, to the patriarchy that they live and work within, because most women, just like you, just like I was, are not aware. They think that they're the problem. They think that they need to be fixed. They think that if they could just do better, be better, lead better, be more confident, all of these things, that all of the problems would go away and they would rise. They would feel better. They would feel more authentic. So what I find is, and this is why Women Rising, this is why the book, this is why the program, this is why Male Allies, is because when women wake up to this revolution, it can feel like of, oh my God, like I was never the problem. It was never about me. It was about the system that I operate within. And they start hearing other women saying, I have the same experience. That happens to me too. Oh, I thought that was just me. What do you mean that's a toxic manager? Or that I'm in a toxic workplace, or I'm being bullied, or I'm being silenced. These are extreme examples, but, they make the point. Then we can start getting to work, right? Then we can start getting to the work of, okay, if I understand that, and I understand that, okay, this is the system outside of me. I call it the forces that hold us back, right? The external forces. Then I get to really be able to step into my empowerment, because then I get to start asking different questions as a woman. Well, how do I want to show up in that system? How do I get clarity on what I really want for myself, for my work, for my life? Where do I find meaning and purpose in my work? How have I, and this is the big one, how have I internalized that patriarchy that has now become my inner critic? And my inner critic narrative, and I write so much about this in the book, that tells me I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not, strong enough to be a leader. All of these inner critic stories that we have internalized, that then we hold ourselves back, right? So when we put those two pieces together, I see these light bulbs go off in women where they're like, oh, okay, now I understand. And now I get to choose, right? I get to choose which system I'm in and which I'm not, how I show up in that system, and what is my work to do to get fully embodied, fully empowered, so that I can make better choices and decisions for myself. So that's what I mean. And I have this vision, and we see it again in real time, where if we can get enough women to understand all of that and to do their own work. And I see this when women come out on the other side of the Women Rising program, they're like, I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm not going to get talked over in a meeting. 74% of women get talked over in meetings constantly, like every day, right? Well, no, excuse me, I wasn't finished with my sentence. women step into this true sense of their power. And if enough of women do that, we will see this uprising. And that's what we're starting to see, where there is no choice for the system to change because the women have changed and the women are rising up. And they are saying, no more will I tolerate this behavior. No more will I show up in this way. And everything starts to change around them. That's what I mean when I wrote that.
Holy moly. It's so good because, I hear the language that you've just used in terms of, we get to push back, we get to say, no, I'm not going to accept this anymore. Feminists have been saying that for a very long time, okay? Those words, right?
Yeah.
However, what I'm hearing from you is that there have been a couple of missing links that you have uncovered. The missing link is defining the system, the patriarchy, waking up to the reality that I'm not the problem. And then the golden question, I'll call it, which is, how have I inherited the patriarchy that has become my inner critic that I'm holding myself to? So why I find that what you do in uncovering that with your clients is that I can imagine then it completely changes the power when I say those same words, because it's not coming from a place of rah, rah, rah. It's coming from a place of grounded understanding and confidence, and even more than that, just this grounded conviction that I'm just going to finish what I had to say.
Yes.
You interrupt me. And it's a different tone, which I imagine is hopefully better received, because it's not coming from a place of rah rah. It's coming from a place of this is education. It's coming from a place of education.
Yeah, I love so much about what you just said. And I think the core of some of that is it doesn't have to feel militant.
Yes, that's the word.
Right? Like it doesn't, it can be very quiet.
Yeah.
That sense of like the work we do with women in the Women Rising program is how do you come back to your most authentic, most grounded, most clear, most confident self? And that's the work, that's the journey. And it can be very quiet. I mean, I work with cultures all around the world. I work with a lot of cultures across Asia. It's not a loud, militant feminism. It is a quiet, grounded confidence that says, I wasn't finished. I'd like to finish my sentence. And that's just one example because it's such a common example. But it can also be, I'm going to ask for the pay rise. I'm going to put myself forward for the next opportunity. I'm going to ask for specificity when I get feedback. Like, you just need to be more confident. What does that actually mean? Can you give me some examples so that I know what to do with that? Or when you told, women get told a lot, you need to be more strategic. Okay, thank you for the feedback. What does that look like in practice? So it is this often this quiet sense of confidence and power. The other side of this that we haven't talked about that's really important is the male allyship. Because the other missing piece of this and the other conversation is, well, this is all just women's work, isn't it? This is just, women will have the employee resource group and women will sit around and women will do the extra unpromotable work. And the piece that, again, I've been working on for nearly 2 decades and doing through our Male Allies work is, where are the men in this conversation? And what is the men's work to do? And we find that so many men are good guys. Most men are good guys. But they're not acting as true, active male allies in the workplace. And so they have the right intention. They, like we often hear, well, I have a wife or I have daughters, so of course I want women to succeed, which is all very true and valid. But what we find when we start doing the work with men is they come in thinking they're male allies. They think they're doing the things. And then we start talking about gender bias in the workplace. What does it look like? What's your role? We start talking about the data, about where women are really at and understanding the landscape for women at work. And all of a sudden, men are like, oh, I didn't know any of that. So they identify themselves with, yeah, I'm a good guy, but when I look at an allyship scale, I'm nowhere near being an advocate. And I'm not doing the things every day in my workplace, in meetings with my team that are progressing equality. They may be the nice guy, but they're not doing the actions. You know, when a woman gets interrupted in a meeting, they're not saying, Mary wasn't finished. You know, when John gets credited for Mary's idea, the male leader or the male ally is often not saying, "Oh, that's a great idea. Mary said that first. Let's go back to her initial thought," right? And we see this, you know, it's attribution bias. We see biases in workplaces around assumptions, around the maternal wall, maternal bias, which is the number one form of bias that women experience, which is all the assumptions that we make about women when they reach childbearing age and they're working. And it goes for a very, very long time, right? Oh, well, maybe she's going to have a baby, so we shouldn't give her that manager role. Oh, she's on maternity leave, so she's out of the running. Oh, she's got 2 kids at home, so she's not going to want to do that travel. You know, all of these examples that are assumptions that when men realize and get the tools, they can create massive change across their workplaces. And that's what we see as well. So this is the whole other side of the work that we have to rally and get men to rally behind and invest in so that they are supported to do this work, not just blamed because we have inequality in the workplace, but they're like, well, no one's actively helping me, supporting me, telling me, including me in what the actual work is. They're just saying, you're the problem.
You're the bad guy.
You're the bad guy.
Yeah.
Right? And they may be the bad guy, but often they don't know why.
Yeah.
And, you know, they come in thinking that they're going to come into this, when they come into the Male Allies program, and they're all like mid to senior level men in organizations, and they come in and you can feel them like bracing. And I had one man on the last cohort that we did say, I was expecting to get on this coaching session with, you know, a militant feminists being told that I'm the problem, and, you know, and he said, and I just came in and I just exhaled because this is just a conversation, all of us doing this work together. And that's what it needs to be, you know? So, because men need the support as well.
The podcast is called The Real Math of Business, so we probably should talk
about
that.
business.
Well, no, well, we have been. I feel like the whole conversation, while obviously we're talking about gender, actually we've been talking about the real math of business just in a different way. One of the things we like to do with every guest is get a sense from their unique perspective what they think the real math of business is, looking at it as a ratio of people and math. And what I love about business is I believe there is no perfect ratio. And so what I love the opportunity each week is to learn new perspectives and learn how I can view business in a different manner with that particular expertise or that particular hat on. So I would love to know, you've mentioned data, you've talked about, you know, the women's way, the maternal way a few times. When you think about the real math of business as a ratio or as some sort of balance or measure of people and math, what comes to mind for you as a ratio?
It's such a good question, right? And I agree with you. I don't think there is a perfect ratio. And I think depending on where you sit, depending on what your view is, what your mission is, what your purpose is, what your business structure looks like, And we could talk about, I mean, I was a business strategist for IBM, right? I get business and I get strategy. Depending on where you sit on that spectrum, it can look quite different, and it can look at different time. It can look different as a different ratio in different times in a cycle, right? Different times in a business cycle. So that's my caveat to what I'm about to say.
Fabulous.
Because I believe that for most businesses, I would always skew to the people over the math. And that the people are the enabler of the math. So, and when we're talking about math, I'm assuming we're talking about revenue and profit and all of those good things, right? Like the juice in the business. And I think we're at a really interesting time because in the age of AI, people are getting further squeezed out of the equation. And I think we're at a real fundamental risk of this ratio going like 90-10 in the other direction. So I think it's always been challenging. I used to have conversations with various CEOs. I had a number of different CEOs when I was an executive at IBM, all great leaders. And with one in particular, this conversation, because I was director of strategy, I was also responsible for organizational culture and change. And this constant back and forth and question and research and where's the data about what comes first, right? Yes. We get business success and then culture thrives, or we get a thriving culture and then business comes, right? Of course, like we've been talking about this for decades and decades and decades. And I started at GE under Jack Welch. So for anyone who understands what that means, you're number 1 or 2, or you're, out of the market, you're an A or you're a B performer. If you're a C, you're gone, like hardcore business. So, my question for leaders is always like, where's the people in this equation? Where's your self-awareness as a leader first? Number one. So when we talk about people versus math, and we talk about leadership, the first question is not for all of those people out there. It's you. Leadership, self-leadership. Where's your self-awareness? What are your strengths? Where are your gaps? Where I talk a lot about traits in leadership. Where are you on your masculine, feminine trait spectrum? And that applies to all genders. Like, how are you leading? How are you showing up in your leadership? Where's your well-being? How's your resiliency? Like all of these questions, the people, I think for so many leaders, the people question starts out there. It's with their teams and the people in the organization. No. You first. Do get this right.
Yeah.
That's the number one part before you even try and solve a math problem in your business. So yes, definitely skewed towards the people, but understand the numbers.
And what numbers would you put if we had to create a number, a number-based ratio skewed towards the people? What would that be for you?
I would probably again, I'm a strategist, I'm a business owner. I would probably say in business, I'd probably say 70-30.
Yeah.
Because we see the opposite, right? Like you see what happens when we lose sight of the people. And so often, and I'm seeing this with women's leadership investment at the moment, based on everything that happened in the US a couple of years ago and the DEI rollback, pushback, extraction, and what's happening now. How many women are leaving the workforce? Attrition numbers are going up. And now companies are going, oh, yeah, all that investment that stopped. Okay, now we need to go full force again, but they've just lost 2 years of progress, right? You can't make up leadership pipelines today because I feel like it. So we see what happens, and this is the backlash we're going to have, I'm sure, that we're already seeing around the whole AI shift away from people that is going to kill us in the long run.
It's so funny. It's not funny, actually. It's amusing. So your ratio is 70-30. It is amusing that we're having a gender-focused conversation and you're the first person ever to talk about the impact of AI on that ratio.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
No, come on now.
True. We've talked about AI, of course.
Right.
But we've not,
fascinating.
what you've given us is, hey, now it's 70-30, but with the emergence and adoption and the full-scale rollout of AI, we risk seeing it shift from 70-30 to 10-90. That's really, and look, that's the power of numbers, right? Because when you look at those numbers side by side, you just think, we can't have that.
Yes.
So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you for bringing that distinction to our attention, because that's really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. That's and the age of AI, right? I just wrote a report. I did a roundtable with more than 100 business leaders around leadership in the age of AI, and wrote a report about it. It's free. It's on our Women Rising website. And you know, so many of the skills that we need in the age of AI in leadership are things like, and we know what they are, their judgment, their critical thinking. Empathy is something that keeps coming up. Empathy is coined in the research as a feminine trait, right? Like, we know this. Doesn't mean men can't lead with empathy, but women have it inherently. So many of the jobs that are going away because of AI are women-held jobs. And so many of the people leaving the workforce at the moment and over the last 2 years are women. So you put all of these things together and it's like, we need to wake up, right? We need to really be looking inside of our organizations and saying, where's my self-leadership? Where are the people? Where's humanity in all of this? Yes, we have to get the numbers. We're running businesses. Otherwise, we're running a hobby, right? Of course, the numbers are important. But where are the people within those numbers? And within that, where is the diversity? Where is the inclusion? Where are the women? Because we're at a really critical turning point. That I really worry that we're going to be sitting here in 5 years looking back going, why didn't we see any of that? And we're going to be in real trouble if we don't wake up.
I agree. Two comments or questions, follow-up questions based on what you've just shared when you were describing your perspective on the real math of business. You said the first question you ask leaders is where's the people in this equation? I can't help but ask, what do you mean by equation? It may mean nothing. It might just be a turn of phrase. But when we're talking about ratios, we're talking about math. I think one of the things it sounds like that you do, one of the things that makes your work so compelling is you make concepts tangible. You bring language and awareness to things that we kind of have just taken as given, or we assume, or, and so, when I hear you say a statement or question like, where's the people in this equation? When you're saying the term in this equation, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, it can be anything, right? It can be anything. It can be when we're looking at the numbers. Like, we're sitting around a boardroom table and we're analyzing the quarter and we're looking at the numbers and the results and making judgments about where we've landed and where the gap is and why the red or why the green, right? Like, why we've just had an absolutely flourishing quarter.
Yeah.
Awesome. Where are the people? Where did the people contribute to that?
Yes.
What worked really well, and how do we amplify it? The quote, one of the quotes that you mentioned that I wrote is a quote from Professor David Cooperrider, who's a world-leading expert on appreciative inquiry, which is a change model. Our life unfolds in the direction of the questions that we ask. That's
Yes.
appreciative inquiry, right? So where we see green, we see something flourishing. How do we take the positive core of that and amplify it, right? It's a change model. Where are the people? What are the people doing? Where are the people in that equation? It could be really like, I think of that, where are the people in the equation for every single thing that we do as leaders?
Yeah.
Where are the people? How did the people contribute? How are the people feeling? Where are their people challenges? Where are the people? Because the reason that question, I think, is so important is because the people get completely lost in the busyness, the pressure, the drive for the quarter, the drive for the numbers, the KPIs, if you're in a, mid to large size organization or a multinational organization, the pressure, the politics, the agendas, the protecting your ass, like all of this, where are the people? The people get lost. And that's, in a macro way, but also in a very micro way, every single day. If you're a leader, where are the people in this equation? Yeah.
I love that. I love that. The other thing that you mentioned was you talked about where are you on the masculine feminine trait spectrum?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about that. Because you said we have both. Everyone has both.
Yep.
So tell me about that. That sounds so fascinating.
Yeah. I knew I had a feeling you would just be like, let's go back to that.
Yeah.
So I've been in and around and studying leadership for 25 years, right? Always fascinated. And in about 2013, I think it was about 2013. No, earlier. I don't know. It was maybe 2011. I don't know. Around then, I saw this piece of research that said the headline was, "The world would be a better place if men thought more like women." And I'm a researcher, so I'm like, and I'm a woman and I work on diversity. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm interested in that. So I started digging. Anyway, it was from this massive study, this meta study, 64,000 people, 13 countries, looking at traits and looking at leaders, that was done as we came out of the global financial crisis of 2008. And to cut a very long story short, what came out was naming of traits as either feminine, masculine, or neutral, and what those traits were, right? And how they apply across spectrums of leadership, morality, success, and happiness. And all of that research is published in a book called The Athena Doctrine. So that started a very long journey for me of looking at traits in leadership and looking specifically at non-gendered feminine, masculine traits. So feminine traits are things like intuition, empathy, vulnerability, planning for the future, long-term thinking. Masculine traits are things like confidence, analytical, command and control, the more sort of traditional traits that we would see in leadership. And there have been so many studies done on this now. And I teach this in the Women Rising program and in the Male Allies program, so that we have this view of, it's one lens to look at, where do I sit? And we're all leaders. Doesn't matter what our role is. Doesn't matter whether we have people responsibility or not. We're all leaders. So how am I showing up? Do I skew more to a feminine trait leadership model? Do I skew more to masculine? Do I have a really nice balance, of both of those traits? How is that serving me? And we all have these traits. We don't live in a gender binary world. Of course, all genders have access to feminine, masculine energies and traits. Long been studied, thousands of years in lots of different, cultures as well, right? Yin and yang, Shiva Shakti, all of these different things. So the conversation gets really interesting with people. When you talk to men who are like, oh, I really skew to the feminine. Like, I'm really all about vulnerability as a leader, and I'm about empathy, and I rely heavily on my intuition. And then we see a lot of women who say, oh, wow, like, I'm so in my masculine traits, and I need to because for women in workplaces, there's been no room and space and acceptance for feminine traits,
Well,
especially
and
in
just
leadership.
just to jump in, it comes back to your question, how have I inherited the patriarchy?
Internalized, yeah, absolutely.
Internalized, yeah, correct.
Yes. Well, external and internal, because the forces, we talk about the paradoxes, right? The forces that hold women back, and then the internalization of that into the inner critic
Mm,
will often drive women as leaders into their masculine traits.
yeah.
And if people just sit here for a minute and think about particularly women who now would be in senior leadership roles, less so the women coming through, because the women coming through who I work with every day, as well as senior leaders, but the women coming through, those who might be, earlier in career, in management, in middle management, and looking above to, going, do I want to be a senior leader? They're the ones who are going, no. If that's what it looks like, if I have to lead like a man, lead with my masculine traits, put my authenticity aside, step outside of my values, I don't want it. And we're seeing this in the data. And we're seeing this in the data in Australia with women stepping out, stepping back, saying, I don't want to be a senior leader. And then we wonder why we have the gap, right? And the women who are at the top, who sometimes get criticized for leading more with their masculine traits, again, we don't look at the systemic view of that and go, why is that true? Why? Because they've been told to fit the model or you won't be successful here. So complex, right?
It is so complex, and I can't help but remember, it reminds me of, I worked in San Francisco for 4 years with KPMG, and it was the first time, it's shameful for me to admit this because, I was in my mid-20s, and I had my performance appraisal with my performance partner, and he said, oh, Eleanor, where do you expect to see yourself in the first 5 years? It was the first time anyone had asked me that question, right? And I said, off the cuff, well, not here, career limiting statement. But to his credit, he said, oh, that's interesting. Why is that? And I said, oh, because, I want to have a family, I want to have children. I just can't see myself doing that here. I just don't see that that's possible. And he then shared how he has done it. And he said things like, and I knew this because I knew him quite well, how he put his family first. He said, look, we have an expectation that we want to be the best. And you can modify what your version of the best is so that you can do all of those things. And it was just such a powerful shift for me, because basically what I was saying without knowing it was, I can't see that I could be at the top. And he said, and he was one of the most senior, smartest partners in the US organization, that he showed me a way. Like he said, I sat in audit committee meetings where they said, we want to have the next one on this date. And he said, no, I'm taking my son to Temple that day. I can't. He talked about how he would walk across the Golden Gate Bridge, and he started walking across the Golden Gate Bridge and doing Tai Chi on the other side on his way to work. And then he loved it so much, he turned up one day not in his suit, and they all thought he got fired. Like, is everything okay?
Yeah.
So I'm listening to you going, wow, this is so true. This perception of what leadership is, but how we have unknowingly tried to navigate the system without knowing what the system is, without intentionally choosing how we want to show up in that system. And here we are still having the conversation decades later.
Yeah. With numbers that are deeply concerning when you look at women's participation in certainly management and leadership levels. with a threat, with a major threat, right, on the horizon, which is, well, there's many threats on the horizon, but AI being one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What do we need to do as we start to sort of round out this conversation, Megan? I'm curious, what do we need to do? I can only imagine the juices that are flowing for the people that are listening and watching this conversation. What's your recommendation, whether they be women or men
Yeah. So, well,
or
it's different,
non-binary?
right? Yeah. Like it's different based on where you sit and where your power base is. And what your goals are. If I, we've had 10,500 women go through the Women Rising program. So like a massive amount of women.
Mm,
And what I say to them is like really understand this, like read the book, understand, what the system is, but then do
mm,
your work, get clear on what you want. So for the women listening, what is it that you want for your career? Where's your meaning and purpose? How have you internalized the patriarchy, and what's your work to do to unhook from that? What type of leader do you want to be? How do you want to show up? What does authenticity look like for you? What does well-being look like for you? Like all of that, that's the work that I really want women to be doing, because when we do that, when we support other women to do that, we really see this systemic change happening inside organizations. So it happens for the women first. And then when we have 20, 30, 50, 100 women from an organization coming through our program together, everything starts to change, right? So do it for yourself, do it with the women. And for the men, and again, just acknowledging we're not in a gender binary, but for the sake of this conversation, for the men, how are you showing up as a male ally? Like, how are you actually showing up as a male ally? Do you understand gender bias? Do you understand the 6 types of gender bias that impact women at work? Do you listen and ask for women's lived experience? What's it like for you working here? Just like the conversation that you had, with your senior partner at that very formative point, in like that would have changed your life and your career, right? That's allyship. That's leadership. So for the men, how are you showing up? What does your self-leadership look like? And how are you educating yourself to actually be part of creating better workplaces, better careers, more inclusion, more equality where you work? And the thing that I hear from men more than anything else is not only does this work change how I show up at work, but it, for so many men, completely revolutionizes their families, their relationships with their wives, if they have a wife, with not just their daughters, with their sons, the conversations at the dinner table. And that changes the world, right? So, yeah. And just also for men, I would say very gently to just check your power and your privilege. Which is also really important. And for white women as well, like myself, check your power and your privilege, right? And where and how are you creating more inclusion, more opportunities for people who don't look like you?
mm, mm. Just a quick question before we finish up. You talked about men, how do you show up as an ally? When you were talking about the work that you do with men before, you were talking about, you were using the terminology ally and advocate, and the way that you were talking about it was almost like there was a spectrum, and we actually need more advocates, because the advocate almost, and I might have misheard it, that's where the action that kind of has more action behind
Yeah.
it. I'm curious, is there a distinction in that language? And if so, should we be talking about male advocates and not male allies? Or am I overthinking it completely?
Yeah, look, I see where you're going, but like in the research, in the work, in the methodology that we teach, an ally is an advocate. And
Okay, they're the same.
right. So the
Yeah.
distinction is, if you are a male, you're going to call yourself a male ally, as so many men do.
Yes.
You are actively advocating for women,
Ah.
right? You're
Yes.
actively
Okay.
advocating for women. You're not passive. You're not, oh, yeah, I kind of get it. You're not a good guy. You are
Yes.
actively advocating for women. You're the one in the meeting who's saying
Understood.
Mary wasn't finished. You're the one who's looking for where are the women on the slate. You're the one saying, where's the investment in our women's leadership development program? I know it's not popular anymore, but where is it? Show me the data, right? You're the one who's calling out men when they're making assumptions about women and their careers. Yeah, you're the one advocating for women's safety, right? So if you are a male ally, you are an advocate, active advocate, using your voice, using your privilege, using your power. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. And what struck me in this whole conversation is that you are clarifying. Everything you're doing is clarifying what is, what can be done, and what do we want. And I think that's so important because we all have opinions around the gender conversation. And those opinions are often based on a lack of knowledge, of assumptions, I'll say, as opposed to a lack of knowledge. So, the word that I wrote and kind of circled was naming, because you use the word naming. I think you do a really good job of naming the things that we may assume we know, but we actually don't. And that, I think, is a really nice way to finish up, clarifying for me, naming that ally is advocate. This has been such a brilliant conversation, Megan. I've learned so much. I'm really grateful for everything you've shared. I'm curious, where can I buy your book, Women Rising? How do I learn more about the program? 10,500 women. I mean, that's just incredible. Well done. If I'm listening to this and I want to learn more, follow you, get your books, investigate your programs, where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that comment before about naming. I really appreciate that. Womenrisingco.com. So that's where we live online. You can find everything about the Women Rising program and the Male Allies program. We run them live as global virtual cohorts, so anyone can join from anywhere in the world. We cover all time zones in our live aspect of the programs. The book Women Rising is available everywhere. So, anywhere you get your books. And I'm on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn at just Megan Dalla-Camina. There's only one of me out there. So I'd love to connect with listeners and hear what they think about this conversation. You're beautiful questions, beautiful discussion. I really appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you. And, I come with a handful of things that I might like to talk about, but I typically go where the conversation needs to go. And I have learned so much. You have named so many things for me. I feel like I walk away from this conversation definitely better educated about this and know some next steps that I will take myself. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And what a great chat with Megan Dalla-Camina. And this leads us right into our listener question. And if you want to submit a listener question, you can now email us at realmathofbusiness@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify and we'll hopefully get it into a future episode. This week's listener question for this episode is from Mike. Dear Eleanor, what metrics do you like that businesses can use? It is fascinating to hear all the different ways your guests use different metrics to look for positive results. Thanks, Mike. You know what? It is so fascinating to hear the different metrics they use for positive and negative results. So thank you for your question, Mike. I think that's brilliant. I'll say an overarching comment. It is fascinating because you can make up any metrics to give you any result that you want. You can make up your results. Let's be honest. Numbers are just numbers. They're kind of a little bit meaningless. It's what you do with them that create meaning, right? So you can create a metric for anything. And quite frankly, I quite like that because, yes, of course, we've got our financial metrics that we all know and love to hate to a certain degree. What I find more interesting and compelling is those non-financial levers or metrics that are more based on observable outcomes or observable behaviours or attributes. And in the past, people have said, oh, well, we can't measure. Like we can't measure the benefit of leadership development, for example, unless it gives us a return on profit or return on revenue. Well, no. The way I like to look at metrics is using scaling questions. So you might say, what is someone's ability to create rapport with their stakeholders? On a scale of 1 to 10, how well is Joe Bloggs able to create rapport with stakeholders? On a scale of 1 to 10. You can say, well, you know what, right now Joe Blogs is pretty good, probably about a 7. And then I would say, okay, so what does 10 look like? And then I can describe what 10 looks like. And now suddenly I have not only an observable scale, but I have metrics that I can measure, right? And so when you use scaling questions, 0 to 10, 0 to 100, whatever you like, it makes almost anything, even the most subjective measure, measurable. It's not scientific for sure, but that's not the point with a lot of metrics. Metrics are designed to help you make decisions, right? Even financial metrics. They're designed to tell stakeholders and shareholders the amount of money they've got to do certain things with. So this idea of scaling questions 1 to 10, it's not scientific, but when you apply them to your most important levers, those metrics really paint the picture. So I think about the CFO boardroom community that I work with, and we ask the same scaling questions every quarter we get together, and we ask questions like job satisfaction. How much do you love your job? Do you love it or you hate it? 0 to 10. That is really easy. Like every single person that works in a job can make a number up, right? And they go, okay, so what's 10? And what's 0? Comfort zone. We ask the question on a scale of 0 to 10, how much for the last quarter do you feel like you were out of your comfort zone? 0, you were perfectly safe and right in your comfort zone. 10, you were so much out of your comfort zone, you were unsafe. And we say 8 is about that perfect sweet spot where you're stretched out of your comfort zone, so you're learning and growing, but you still haven't tipped over to that the lack of safety. One of the things I love when we talk about kind of strategic leadership is the above the line, below the line ratio. How much of our time, effort, and energy is invested in above the line activities, strategic leadership, change leadership, and below the line activities, controllership and team leadership. So I actually don't mind what ratio or what metrics a company uses, as long as it's a lead indicator that helps you make decisions going forward. So, for example, in a sales-based organization or a service sales-based organization, the number of outbound calls or approaches or contacts. Yes, of course, they're looking at revenue, but what drives revenue? Calls, approaches, contacts. You can't make a sale without a sales call. So it's those lead things that allow me to go, I'm going to measure those things. And that's what I'm going to focus on. So I'm a little less interested in, revenue, EBITDA, those sorts of things. I'm more interested in metrics that tell me something about performance in a way that I can make better decisions. So I'm interested in, metrics that become levers to grow business performance. So my question really to you, Mike, is do you know what those are? Do you know how much you want to turn each one of those metrics up and down? And then do you know the numeric impact as a result? As I said, scaling questions are the thing that does that for me. Thank you for listening to The Real Math of Business with Eleanor Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and stay on top of The Real Math of Business. I've been Eleanor Bennett. Thank you for listening.